in the beginning, but are you okay to like start talking about like something that you're building right now, or maybe you have like a user story or something else you'd like to lead with, or do you have anything that you're
I mean, I can. There's a few things that we're building right now so that are pretty exciting. One is more tech, some are more products, some are more businesses. Like right now, we're actually closing a super big deal. Did we start already, or is it like still?
we did, and let's just keep let's
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good. So, one of the things we're closing right now is actually a huge deal with a talent agency. You know, like we have all those creators part of our network that run our games, and of course, for us, a lot of the value of the company is being able to reach that audience through channels. And so that deal is super important for us because we have like about 1 million MAU right now. That deal is going to get us by March to about 10 million MAU. And
wow,
everything is that's a
wow.
huge increase. And for us, it's really the supply, those eyeballs, they're gold. Because once you have them part of your network, then it's easy to just expose them to branded games, get them to engage the ecosystem, get the coin, all those kind of things. But it all starts by the fact that you need to find a way to like get those eyeballs exposed to your product. This is one of the hardest thing when you're building a company. People have like the
Yes,
go-to market.
right.
Many people have great ideas, but no way to put in that product in front of eyeballs.
The GTM is where a lot of people are like, I got a great idea, I got a great team, we got a great product. It's like the final scene of Finding Nemo, and all the fish are in the little baggies because he's cleaning the fish tank, and they have a little air in the bag, and then they like plop out of the window,
Yeah.
roll across the road, and then plop, plop, plop all into the ocean. And they're like, we did it, we escaped. And then the one big puffer fish goes, okay, now what?
Yeah, you know
Right.
it.
And I think that's a lot of startups like, okay, now what?
Well, a lot of startups have great ideas to your point. They build super nice products, they have insight, they have vision when it comes to building products. But then you have two things that are usually retesting the product. One is the product market fit, everybody talks about it. The other one that people don't talk about it enough is the product channel fit.
Yes. Yes.
Because understanding you may have like before you get to find if you have a product market fit, you actually need to be able to distribute to the right people to the right channel and find a way to doing it in an efficient way. And this is probably today in an age where attention is so expensive, so hard to get. This is probably one of the biggest challenge. Any new product, get finding that channel that leads to the audience that are going to be liking this product in strong amounts. That's so hard.
Wow, I'm really glad we started there because I think of startups kind of like roughly in like three stages. It's search, build, grow. And search is not like, Google or Bing or something, but it's you're looking for the product market fit. You're in the desert and you're kind of like just lost, and okay, I got product market fit. I built a product, and now it's build and then build. Okay, now we have to build a company around that product. And then there's grow, which is let's expand the user base, let's expand the number of products. And I feel like you're in that kind of like you have product market fit, you built a company, you've built many companies before, but now when you're going from you already got a million MAU. Like last time I checked, that's a really nice
Yeah.
neighborhood. And now you're going to go to 10.
Yeah, and it's really because we were lucky to find the channel first. You know, it's interesting. We I started watching a TV show a couple of days ago. I forgot the name of that show, but the gist is that it's a billionaire. He starts off from scratch with $100 in his pocket in a new city. He has 90
Oh,
days to build $1 million business. And the number one rule that he gives out, the number one tip that he gives out is that whatever you're doing, find the buyer first. You have to start by finding someone who wants to buy, and then you build the product and you figure it out. But you have to find someone who's willing to buy something and work from there, which is interesting. I feel like too often people are just starting from a hunch of something that they feel would should be interesting, but really you know it if you find someone really ready to pay for it. So we were lucky because we started on Twitch, and we started from that 2018 stage with Twitch. If you remember, they created something called the Extension SDK, so they allowed people to put buttons on streams.
yes.
Everybody was looking at that as a way to create tipping or some kind of like mini apps that would like just basically you can pay a few beats. That's the currency on Twitch. It would fart on the stream and make everybody laugh. So those apps were kind of like very limited because at the end they were always made to be used very seldom during the streams. They were like, you know you know what happens when you put a button? You can make a game and get everybody to watch to play at the same time. So we're like, because at the end, if you really like deconstruct what's a game, it's buttons you click. And the simplest
You're
guess
right.
is simple.
You're
It's
right.
just buttons you click over and over again. And we tell you a great
Yes.
story about why clicking that button is so cool and makes all those things happen. And we create those dopamine. But at the end of the day, it's clicking buttons. It's put, so we looked at that and like, this is crazy. This is not for, nobody cares about tipping. We are going to get everybody who's watching to click those buttons because it's going to be a super cool game that everybody who's watching is going to play at the same time. And that was kind of like the restart of our thinking about how streams really should not be TV. They're not laid back. They're meant to be interactive because we put that first button,
Lean forward. Yes.
91% of the audience clicked it. So you know that people like clicking buttons.
Man, yeah. And they're gamers typically because
Yeah.
a lot of Twitch, viewers are playing. So that's incredible engagement rate. Wow.
And yeah, and that was that was learning like right there. So we didn't quite have the full vision at this, but we saw like this is cool. You can actually get people to play while they watch. What does it mean? And that's really how we started Azarus. Like started from that assumption like gaming, streaming, crypto, how does it mix together? Let's make an experiment and see how that plays out because we just wanted to feel like, are we making things up? We have a channel. If we put this on that button on the channel, will the channel react?
Fantastic. Wow. So that was actually the origin story to like see that new feature
Yeah, because
by Twitch that sort of like opened up the the portal in your head to like, let's go explore that.
yeah, so I did that course of futurism at Stanford a couple of years back. Stephanie, my wife, like kicked me and forced me to go there. We're like, I want to do this course, but like super interesting. It just opened my chakra so much. And the whole premise of that course is that you have to look at basically artifacts of the future.
Facts of the future. Wow. I love that.
and, and and that's how you build your vision of the future. Like what's happening, what are those small signals that you're seeing, those things that are seem kind of like not newsworthy, but like little things that are happening. And the fact that Twitch opened an SDK is just to let you put a button on a stream, that was an artifact. All those things that kind of compounded in my head, like bringing together, like really tying those artifacts into formulating the vision of what Azarus is today. But it's really how it started for me. That was an artifact. The fact, like that idea of putting a button on a stream, as simple as it sounds, if you think about it, we're talking about 4 billion people watching streams. Imagine 4 billion people clicking buttons.
Yes.
Do you see that scale is mind blowing?
But 17 years ago, the first time I saw YouTube and they just had that play button, that sideways triangle,
No,
and I was like, "Huh?" And I clicked that and it played because up to that point,
yeah,
boys and girls listening to this from 1990 whatever until 2005, oh, you have to download this, player and you have to put a some, maybe side load it and it was clunky and it never worked and then that like click and it worked. Like so you had enough sort of, scabs and calluses and scar tissue, like armor that you were like, "Oh, this is important. I see this."
that's exactly right. And even before that, you had to actually have a cable box. So if you think about it, the fact that you can actually play a video by clicking a button, this is a really cool game already, and you win every single time you click it. It's pretty satisfying if you ask me. So yeah, so it's all started like that. Like it was really an experiment, and we were lucky to have Ubisoft helping us out in running that experiment. So we're part of the Ubisoft Entrepreneur Lab, and they basically set us up with the Rainbow Six Siege team, and we were able to experiment with some of with one of their biggest IP. So that was super helpful because that got us immediate street credibility. Like sometimes you play a game, you say, hey, you all are going to be playing on the stream, and there are some rewards to be won. If you're Azarus and nobody has heard of you, probably not. You may not be as credible as if you say, hey, you're going to earn Rainbow Six credits because we're in partnership with Ubisoft, and we met all the creators at the Rainbow Six Siege majors in Paris with all the team at Ubi chaperoning us. So definitely helped build that initial credibility and make sure that we are taken seriously and that we don't look like yet another startup trying to build something weird. So it's that definitely helps. But that initial simple idea, which is put a button on a stream, people are going to be clicking it, hit home immediately, and that's really what helped us really then iterate on the vision. Well, what does it mean? What does it mean that people can click that button? What do you do with it?
And what did it mean when you first launched, and what does it mean now?
Well, it's kind of like it's always the same story. It means that people notice those buttons, and that means a lot. It's just like Netflix, they launched Bandersnatch, and everybody played it.
Yes.
But the button on a stream, everybody notices, and just this is an artifact. You're like, all right, it's not just us having that weird mind construct of maybe people want to play on streams and don't want to be lean back or what, but it's a proof point. And as you build a business, you basically add up those proof points one after another. You pile them up and you make sense of them, because I think you really have to build while matching the expectation of the audience. And that's another thing that I've seen too many times. People really being very focused and deadbolted on their vision and what they think is true, which works for Steve Jobs most of the time, apparently, often has worked. But the reality is that,
But those people are not Steve Jobs. Yes.
well, I mean, not many people around here are Steve Jobs, and
Yes.
and for one good idea that he's been recognized for, he missed a Newton, he missed quite a few things, and so I think
I think he was absolutely right. He was just super early, that I guess. And then maybe he
which is
learned,
the case for many companies and
yeah.
many startups.
And then like Pixar, he funded Pixar for 10 years and led money,
Yeah,
and he was absolutely right. But a lot of people would have given up because it was too early, but he kept going, right? So he could afford to keep going,
yeah.
and other people can't. But I love you said like deadbolt is like really strong, excellent use of words. And by the way, you're non-native English speaker, and I'm supposed to be coming up with those really cool words, not you. Okay, so can you just back off a little bit there?
All right,
But
sorry. Yeah,
deadbolt
apologize. I can do the. Do you want me to do a French accent? So I can force it a
dead
little.
well, it's beautiful because I think you're absolutely right that people have this vision, and their vision becomes so personal to them, and it's like a baby, and then they're like, I can't, if I move from this vision, then I'm not being true to myself. But actually, you don't have to be true to yourself. You have to be true to the user. User. You have to be user centric, not you centric. And I think unlocking that deadbolt and going to where the user is, like you smelled that early on. You were like, the users are already in streams and the users already click buttons. So let's go there. Like that's where you started. And I think that's beautiful. Like you really, and then the other thing is, if I may, you're French and you're like, maybe you leverage that French mafia, like the French connections. I'm going to Ubisoft, right? The Five Brothers, huge players. I can unlock that, and like you don't have to be so precious or so like everything has to be pure and I have to start like, no, you want to leverage, let's leverage streaming, let's leverage a big player, and now you're at 1 million MAU, and that's very unusual in this space right now.
That's a big number for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think like you have to work on your strengths, and as you can tell, I'm not 20, so I've been around. I have a few friends here and there that are ready to help out. That like everybody's
make a
always
bet on you.
interested
Yeah.
in. Yeah, it's not just making a bet. Everybody's learning. When we started with Ubi, it's not
Yes.
them betting on me, but like they were curious to see the result. This is interesting for everybody, and we were able to
It's
make a bunch
experiment.
of
Yeah.
tests. Yeah, it's experiments. It's a cool idea. It doesn't cost a lot of time and effort to try it, so why not? Basically, it's just about making sure that the brand doesn't take any risk, and you're being reasonably safe, and then why not? So I think actually those things are not that hard to come by. It's really about nurturing those relationships and asking for help. I think people too often just stay in their own man cave or woman
Yes.
cave or
Yes.
it cave and don't just like have those conversations. Because to your point, like the it's you may have a great vision and make a great idea, but at the end, I always see a great idea as being a data point. It's one point. Like this idea makes sense. It you kind of make you can make a mental model around it, but the reality is that what does it mean to others? And I always found it even like when you're raising money. For me, raising money is about making cash, but the biggest value I always got from raising money was seeing how people would rephrase and adjust the story I just told them,
Beautiful. Yeah.
because it's actually super interesting to listen. Like sometimes they would just take tidbits that you were not really feeling is the
Yes.
cornerstone of your story, and they put them in a different context. Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Indeed.
And this really helps you build up, especially in the early days, helps build up the not just the narrative but the global vision. Like you, because even you're looking at it from your own perspective, which is kind of limited to your own past experience. Maybe you're actually missing 90% of the market. You have no idea how other people are seeing what you're building. And it took us a while actually to be able to understand what we're building at Azarus, because we're from the beginning like we're getting everybody who's watching to play. And the very first thing we thought is that we were building a way to create engagement and retention on streams. That's what we thought. And it's true, by the way. We increase engagement and retention on streams. The dirty little secret is nobody's ready to pay for that today. But what we found is actually it's not the retention engagement that's important, it's the fact that we're turning every screen, every video player basically into a seat inside a digital stadium.
Oh. Oh, peel that back. That's a beautiful vision.
If you think about, yeah, but if you think about it, it's the same thing, but just like through the lens of folks from the NBA, from the like that's just like gives you a different perspective. It's the same thing. It's the same product, but it's a different vision. It's a different mission. And our mission is to figure out what does it mean to be in a digital stadium? What are the experiences that you expect? When you go to a stadium,
Yes.
you expect the t-shirt
Yes.
toss, you expect the kids cam, you expect all those, you expect everybody booing when someone is coming like during the defense, yelling defense, or insulting the ref when he gives a bad call that we vastly disagree about. But like you expect those interactions when you're watching a stream. It's basically you missing that layer, that engagement layer, that thing that connects all the viewers together through that same shared experience. So it's basically a seat on a digital stadium. Again, same thing, very different way of framing it and telling the story and building for it, because it came from people that had a different experience. And now we have totally integrated that vision, because that's, again, this is super powerful. This allows us to reach not just people playing Ubisoft games, but 4 billion people watching streams, which is a very different market.
Fascinating. Yeah, and that's something that you could only uncover by actually embarking on that journey. But one thing about that journey that I love that you talked about, you said you studied at Stanford. You know, there's a professor there named Steve Blank. He was the professor for Eric Ries from the Lean Startup, and he talks about in his 4 steps to the epiphany and unpacking how to be successful as an entrepreneur is getting out of the building. Like you have to get out of the building. You have to talk to people. And oftentimes, like you talking to Ubisoft, like that's another point of validation. You talk to other investors, those investors see dozens, hundreds of other deals, and then they're able to go, "Oh, that's interesting because of this." And that validates it and clarifies it and just helps you move along on your journey. So it's important to get out there. And I think oftentimes some really good builders are really not necessarily good at like getting out of the building and talking to people. Maybe they're a little introverted, or maybe they prefer to just sit and code, or maybe they're not, maybe they're not as open-minded, radically open-minded. Ray Dalio talks about to be really, really, truly radically open to everything and only care about the user. And I think that's really important. And it feels like that's what you've internalized. Like what else? Like you have this distribution strategy. It sounds exciting. What are you doing right now during the bear to build in terms of like product and tech side?
Well, in our case, I don't mind the bear market because we're not, we built a product first. Now we're launching a crypto, but we have those users. We have an ecosystem of stakeholders that already have value through the coin. So if anything, I'm grateful not having to deal with too much
Yes,
like day traders and too much people just like looking for make
speculate.
to make a speculating, making a quick buck. Thank you. That's it. So I'm pretty grateful personally.
I think that's actually your word, isn't it? Speculate, isn't that a French word? I threw that back to
Is.
you.
And
That's actually
it's kind of funny because it's one I always struggle to like. What's that word again? Speculating. Yeah, I don't like doing that. But like, but it's super interesting because a lot of people I find that the bear market is a deal breaker. But I think it's actually it shows whether you're building something that brings value to your users or you're building a smokes and mirrors. And that it's if it's bringing value, it doesn't matter that you're in a bear market. People are going to use your product. If you're making a game that's fun, people are going to play it. If you're making a platform that brings value to some people, they're going to be using it. It's not because it's crypto that it has
intrinsic value. Yeah. Yes.
that the value lives on the that the value lives only on the exchanges. That's not right. As a matter of fact, the way I always explain it, like when you build a business in crypto, you're also building a business.
Yes. Right. Right.
And people tend to actually forget that, right? That there's actually there's always the way I like to look at it is that there's two axes. One is like captured by the equity, the other one by the community. The equity is actually a business, so you better have value, create something that's valuable. There is a business, people willing to pay, to invest, to work with you. And then you have the community angle, which is like mostly captured by the token. Yeah, do people care about want to have that token? Is it meaning something inside that community? Will give you some status, some utility. But those things, they work together at the end. Like they're not correlated, they're two different axes, but having few like if you only have the tokens, basically you are at the mercy of like people just getting bored and not interested in what you're building anymore. If you have all the equity, then you're building a business, but you're missing on the building on capturing the value of the community and creating and giving something back to your users, which is one of the big opportunity of crypto. So 2022, you actually need to reconsider both angles. How do I include my community? How do I still build a business? And all stakeholders are going to be more or less skewed towards one or the other. Clearly, users are not going to be, unless you're a privately traded company, they're not going to get any of your equity, but they can be still a part of the community through the token and have an impact. And through DAOs, through voting, through social status, through the ownership of the coin, they can have a word and a way in your product, just like the equity holders and the board members and the owners, they have a way in your product through the business side.
Terrific. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
You actually really need to consider both. It's not one or the other. You need both of them. If you only have one, you basically either missing out or building on a very fragile foundation.
Great. And I think that you smelled that early on. This is not your first rodeo. You're like, okay, I really see buttons on streams. That's a business. And I'm going to work with Ubisoft. I'm going to work with this agency. Like I know how to lever things and piggyback off of that on the equity business side. That's great. On the community side, there's I know you have a strong background in blockchain, and I'd like to go into that a little bit later. But for now, being able to leverage tokens. There's an article by Chris Dixon, and he talks about using token incentives to bootstrap new networks. Because in the beginning of every network, there's always that cold start problem. What we talked about before, the okay, now what, right? And tokens are a way to really accelerate and kind of get out of the gravitational force of the atmosphere and then go into free floating space, so to speak, and hopefully not crash and burn. Like, what are some of the lessons you've learned? Because you were pretty early on in leveraging that. Um, some of the token, um, a lot of other games launch kind of brokenomics, And I think there's a lot of learnings around that, but it seems like you've been able to sort of conceptualize and launch and manage well.
Well, actually, I've never created a community with token just from the start. I've been involved in two companies that are meaningfully token centric. One is Upland, and the other one Azarus. Upland actually never
Okay.
sold a token. If you think about it,
Okay.
Upland is a blockchain company. They use an in-game currency that has fiat on-ramp and off-ramp, and they never airdropped or used the token as a way to launch. They did make NFT sales because the NFTs have a utility in the game, and you were able to collect them and play the game, which I think is brilliant. But I think a lot of products that have created a community through like all those bounties on Bitcoin token, basically making those airdrops and creating that FOMO, that's very hard to maintain long term. The only way that you can maintain it is to actually have a product with real utility coming in a reasonably short amount of time. And most of the time when I've seen that, it ended up blowing off. Not a lot. All the companies that matter today, I don't think any actually did an airdrop. Maybe I'm wrong, but so I'm not totally. I don't totally agree with.
Well, if I may, like Phantom Galaxies has done an airdrop, but they did it for free, and I think they learned from that to be able to like
Yeah,
push out the whales and the bots, and then they make money on the secondary sales, and then that's created like a very robust, active community. And I think that's maybe one more step in the evolution. We'll see where that goes. But I think yeah, I think it's still it's a you know real time evolution.
yeah, and I think it's a hard one. 'Cause a lot of the playbook is still being written here, so it's important to not discount any test that can be done now. I think if for everyone who's really looking at, please don't take anything we're saying here for face value, because if you have an idea that's different and you want to try it, you should. The other thing that's always important to me is making sure that if you build something it brings, it's clear what the value is for the owner and what you expect from them. Like if I'm going to give you a token, you should know why you're getting that token, what it does, and why you should have it and why you're getting it. It's all about transparency, and I feel like there's a lot of actually transparency is one of the big problems that we've had in blockchain in many cases. It's transparent because it's on the ledger, but really you don't really know what's going on in those projects. Hence all the reg pools, all those things, all those smoke and mirrors happening. It's actually a really tough problem that the industry is facing as a whole, which is like who really makes the decision, like that airdrop, why that amount, why it's kind of a little bit. It's fascinating and scary at the same time because to your point, you have the ability to reach anyone. I can drop coins to anyone's wallet right now. You go at a scan, take a list of address that are active, wallets that are active. You can airdrop them. And does it make it a community? Do they understand what you're doing? Are they here for valid reason? What is that worth? And that's like this is where I'm questioning this type of methods. But when you're doing it the other way around, is you're getting people like involved from the beginning. You're getting them to like in our case, we're rewarding attention. Like on chain, when you're watching the channels on Twitch and you're engaging with the game, and you decide, hey, I'm going to spend 2 minutes playing that game. I opt in to share my data, not your email address, anything personal, like basically sharing those 2 minutes of behavior with a brand paying sponsoring this game. I'm going to get a fair share of tokens in exchange. And this is a clear value. You're doing something intentionally, you understand what you're doing, and you're getting value in return in the form of tokens. And
So
that makes sense.
tell us, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean that's great. So like let's peel back how you've done that, how you've brought things on chain, how you've done the as a coin or as a credit. Like what are the mechanics behind that? And what have you learned from that? And where do you think that's
Oh,
going to evolve?
to start. Yeah, so funny story. We actually built when we started in 2018. We were building on EOS.io. I'm not sure if you remember EOS.io. It was
Yes.
like a second generation blockchain, super fast, super promising. still a big fan of the tech, although the ecosystem did not evolve as fast as I had hoped back in the days. So it's still very raw. But so we've been on blockchain from day one because there were a few things that we found fascinating about the technologies. Like first, it allows people to create trust out of thin air, which is really the core value if you think about it. Because we had cryptography before, we had public and private keys, we even had
Yeah.
distributed networks. I mean, if you look at BitTorrent and like everything was there. Like the thing that's new is how you get people on the distributed network using cryptography to agree that some transaction
Yeah.
is legit and immutable.
Rocks out of thin air. That's beautiful. Yeah.
So this is really the core value here. And we felt when we started Azarus that if we're going to be distributing points and rewards and want to make it in a fair way, we need to be able to prove out that story we're saying like, hey, we are going to give you coins and you're going to be able to use them and you have them in your pocket. How do we prove that out? Oh, we put them on chain. Sounds obvious now, but like 4 years ago, a little less obvious. So
Sure.
that's really how it started. Like being able to always demonstrate that why you got those coins, where they're coming from, and how much you got right now in your pocket. Answering those simple questions. Basically, distributed ledger, verifiable. And day one, so now it's a little bit more abstracted in the current version of the product. But like when we started, you actually had access to the whole logs. You can like you had a block explorer right inside the product. You could actually explore all those transactions and get to the details. And that really helped us create a lot of trust. And what was phenomenal is to see people actually on our Discord helping each other by going through the logs and pointing out and explaining to people why they got that many coins or that much or that little.
Wow. Interesting. I mean, other users in the community.
Yeah,
Wow.
just exactly
Wow.
helping each other because you empower them, you give them the tools, you provide transparency, and
Yeah.
some
I
users
I
are
haven't
just
heard that. It's almost like a ticket is, like, being handled by another community member. You get people who are
yeah.
really keen, and they're like, "Hey, look, you can see right on chain here that this is why this happened." So, it's all legit, it's all transparent, it's all clear. Um, which I think, we've kind of maybe lost sight, in this kind of market. There's been a lot of, um tumultuous market activity in the DeFi space, but a lot of that stuff it's just not transparent. It's not on chain. And I think people are complaining that it's actually centralized and opaque. And but the things that you've been building all the way from the beginning have been distributed and trustless and um
and to your point, actually, the real problem here is readability because a lot of those things are actually on chain, but like good luck understanding. Like when you try
yeah,
to understand, if you look at a project and you try to figure what are the notable wallets of this project, it's not transparent. In our case, you go in our light paper, you can see the list of the notable wallets. You can see the list of the board decisions on anything that will impact vesting schedules. Like those elements of transparency. Though at the end of the day, you have millions of people owning your coins and being part of your community. You have the same. I think they should have the same expectation of transparency that
yeah,
investors have of public companies.
indeed.
There's no, you need to know who's calling the shots, who has the keys to the wallets, what are the rules, what are the safe places, what are the processes. Those things need to be transparent. Because if you're not, it's kind of sketchy. And every time that they're not, we get what we just got. Like it's weird games that are being played in the back room and
Yeah.
that are wreaking havoc in the market. I remember like back in 2014, I had coins in Mongox. I lost all of them. So this is
Oh
just like
no.
just looking at the market is like, hey, it's just repeating itself.
All that is old
Different.
is new again. Yeah.
Well, actually, with more like right now, the game seems to be a little bit more elaborate than it used to be because back then it was basically mismanagement and maybe some hacks. Here it's plain abuse of like creating value out of thin air, which is not what you should be doing. You can create trust, not value out of thin air.
Ah, terrific, terrific, point. Terrific point, yes. Because that's the thing is that people are trusting that value out of thin air, but that's actually not really trustworthy, indeed. Indeed. So you're creating trust by putting everything transparently and easily
Yeah.
decodable on chain. That's great. Yeah.
And I'm looking really like, and I think these are things that the Stephanie you've met, she's my wife, is working on. Like, how do you build transparency? How do you build processes? How do you not end up in this situation? Like, if you're not able to easily see the circulating supply of the token, to see why is that thing vesting, where those coins are going, you cannot make sense of those transactions. How are you going to be trusting anything that this project is telling you?
That's great. And you know what? That's actually one thing that I've found as a entrepreneur, angel, mentor over the past almost 30 years is that the companies that are the best at consistently sharing investor updates, probably monthly, sometimes even weekly. The ones that are in the light the most, those are the ones that kind of have the best chance for success because you only improve what you measure. And when you're completely exposed and transparent, then, there's no things that, start to grow in the shadows. And I think it's the same, like if you're a, Web3 builder out there, like defer to the default setting should be more transparency. And that's just going to, be a little bit more difficult, but you should be in the light. And I think maybe what's happening in the DeFi space, it's pushing the Web3 space more into the sunlight, hopefully, rather than into the shadows.
Yeah, and to be fair, a lot of projects were transparent and were very credible.
Of
Just
course, sure,
like
sure, sure. Yeah.
so, I'm not saying that this is not the norm. Like a lot of the most successful projects are probably today the most transparent, but they still, especially when I look at centralized projects, it's a little worrying, and we wouldn't be in the situation we are today if there was some level of, I don't want to say regulation, because when we talk about transparency and regulation, I think the DeFi space should be able to regulate itself by providing the amount of the proper elements that are needed to understand what's going on the chain. Like a little bit of readability, a little bit of transparency would go a long way to make sure that people are able to understand what is actually going on. When it comes to a centralized project, it's just like you can't trust one guy with a ton of a few billion in his pocket to be sensible. It's not working.
Mm.
It's just not working.
So,
That's why you need regulation and you need to be
sure, certainly, right? Absolute power corrupts, absolutely, yes. But I think it's more about like the self-reporting and like kind of, the default settings and when you're thinking about building in the future. And I think, yeah, and I'd love to have your wife on the pod in the future, talk about the good work that she's doing. You guys are both from France. You live in Silicon Valley. You spent time with me here in Bali. I was very,
it's awesome.
honored to host you guys after seeing you at Singapore Blockchain Week. It was so great. Um, your last name is you have Romanian heritage, but grew up in France. So I know that you're a 462-year-old vampire, a benevolent one, a very friendly one, and
Yeah.
you have too much wisdom and sense of humor to just be a normal mere mortal. But let's take us back a little bit to your journey, your path to Silicon Valley, and some of your entrepreneurial trials and tribulations and triumphs along the way.
Yeah, so I got three notable exits. I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years. I'm an engineer first, so it kind of shows I like to deconstruct things and understand how they work
You
before
do it well.
being able to build them.
Yeah.
It's like I'm having a hard time not dealing with things I don't actually understand deeply as the engineer in me. And so yeah, so I've right after school I started my first business. Got my first exit a couple of years later. We got acquired by that huge company.
Oh, you got to tell me what that was.
So it was pretty funny with creating basically interactive mobile apps. So interactive is kind of a pattern here, but before the iPhone. So if you remember, like, and this is us having, especially me, gray
Feature
hair and the
phones.
beard. You remember the Blackberries, the Symbians, all those cool things that had different screen sizes, CPUs,
Yes.
OSs. Everything was a nightmare to manage. The
Yes.
experiences
Yeah.
were terrible. So we basically were building apps that were actually interactive and would scale to the different screen size, adjusting themselves. Like think just like an SVG, basically changing the aspect ratio on the fly. And that allowed us to basically create experiences that were consistent across devices, even within the same. So we had it's funny, we had Alcatel as one of a customer, and because they were creating their own devices with different screen sizes, and they were building their, like a lot of heterogeneity natively, and they had trouble dealing with the heterogeneity they were created, and that's what they were creating. So we're like coming with our know-how and helping them basically.
On like a white horse to help them to
Well,
like
yeah, they
bring
had.
it into the
Yeah,
masses.
so
Yeah.
the basic apps like music, the basic music app, the MP3 players, all those kind of things, they could not make something that was pleasant and enjoyable to use, interactive, because of the diversity of the devices. They had like such a wide range of screen, device type, CPUs, everything. So we're really good at that. Got acquired a couple of years later. That was a super cool exit, and then. Second company, we got acquired by F-Secure. That was super nice too. We were doing basically a cloud storage white label, and we got acquired by F-Secure. And that
Excellent.
was fascinating. I was focusing mostly on the mobile backup. And if you remember those times, but it was getting
That was a good
iPhones
pain
and
point.
photo phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those pictures, you don't want to lose them. So we built a whole offering around that, synchronizing your contacts, your pictures, and that rolled out everywhere. We had customers like in the US, like AT&T, America Mobiles in South America, all the way, just because everybody had that problem. You do not want to lose that data, and consumers were ready to pay for that backup. They don't want to lose that data. So F-Secure acquired us. That was a super cool exit, and I got to spend some really really fun times in Finland. Had a team in Oulu, which is a surprisingly fun place. 'Cause
I enjoy Finland a lot. Yeah, and I think the
yeah,
startup scene and the tech scene and the culture, I really yeah, and I think you and I have kind of a similar energy of like more like a little higher energy and optimism, and I think fits well with the Finns who tend to be a little bit lower key, and then like you can kind of bring out this really I love spending time in Finland.
once in a while, when they start having fun, they're hard to
Yeah, to
stop.
watch
Like
out. Yeah.
you better watch out. I remember like priceless nights. So Oulu is like a couple hours north
Helsinki, yeah.
of Helsinki. Thank you. And so it's very close to Rovaniemi, which is the place where where Santa Claus lives.
Yes.
Allegedly, never been there.
Frozen.
So
Yeah.
yeah, this thing I remember, like it was white and perfect, and you could see the Finns just biking through its streets in their bikes that had like snow tires on, and they were like just blazing through the street. And so I remember my first night there, like literally first night. So I ended up like working, having a team there in Aulu. So first night there, I'm like at my hotel. It's cold, but I want to kind of check out the night, the city. And there was that pub. The light was on. It was loud. I come in. It was the rehearsal of the air guitar championship that was happening the next day. The most fun
Oh
and the
my
most
god, how
random
did
I
that
had
oh,
ever
wow.
was. It was one of the best. Like I have memories of that night to this day. That's like what 15 years later. It's I still remember this night. That night was crazy, and like I have plenty others.
Oh, like I've seen this one Finnish band, it's called Apocalyptica, it's a heavy metal cello band. So
Yes,
they're like
I know
they're
about it. Yeah.
all about the, like, just thrashing with, like, the heavy metal stuff. That's great. Wow, fun anecdote. Alright, so far, I see 2 pattern recognitions, which is, let's move into an industry before it started, like feature phone to smartphone and, pre-cloud, and then, let's build let's start with a big pain point inside of there and like, hey, it's really difficult to make these interactive. It's really difficult to upload stuff to the cloud. It's like very, very, and it's like kind of similar to what you're doing now in a way. It's like, let's look at like streaming and blockchain and like, let's do something that's, really, it seems simple, but it's not easy to do. So, okay, let's continue on your exciting hero's journey. What's startup number 3?
The certain industry was interesting where we were doing automated video editing for video games. So hooking into the game engine and basically understanding through the data what when something cool is happening on the screen, capturing it, creating video replays. And we got acquired by that European startup that does basically GeoForce Now white label for telcos. became our tech became the social layer that helps people see what other people are playing and how they're doing in all
Uh,
those different games. So super fun. But back to what you were saying back on the pattern recognition, finding a pain point. I think funny enough, it's kind of the same thing for the consumer, but you have to be more open minded because it's kind of a you find a pain and someone ready to pay for it in the B2B space, it's kind of a lot easier because you have a much
yes.
smaller sample size and like the diversity of
Yeah.
buyers is kind of like
And
very
you could see the pain.
yeah.
The pain is like measurable kind of, right? But you're kind of guessing more with B2C. You have
Well,
to
in
be, yeah.
B2C, if you have 100 people telling you they have that pain, you don't know that it's a reasonable sample size. Or it's probably not
Yeah,
actually.
or will they pay for it?
Yeah.
Or do you have the right solution? And they don't know, so it's just a lot more difficult to
So
land
yeah.
that dart in the board. Yeah.
If you have 100 businesses telling you I'm ready to pay for that, you probably have a
Yeah.
business here. If you have 100 consumers telling you this is cool, I'm ready to pay for that, hey, you can definitely like be sure that they may not end up putting a credit card number if you give them a credit like a form to fill up. And B is not because you find 100 who are ready to pay because you look specifically for those guys that there's a billion of them.
Hey,
Very
so
hard
yeah.
to scale
Yes.
and to put into perspective.
Mm. So let's go back. So you're 3 for 3 now. Like that's not so like once you're lucky,
Oh,
twice
no,
you're
no.
good.
Whoa,
Three.
whoa, whoa. Those are the three that worked out. There's a
Oh,
bunch that failed. We didn't talk about the bunch.
but I was about to hang up on you and just end this podcast because it's like now
No,
you're
no. Those are the
ruining it
top
for
five.
everybody else. Yeah. Okay. Good.
No.
Good. Good.
Like
Yes.
this, my very first company actually failed after doing some really cool stuff. We're doing basically we're turning any device into connected devices. That was early 2000. So if you remember, Wi-Fi was all new, and making a Wi-Fi robot was actually super hard because there was no Wi-Fi on chip, no like system on chip solutions. So my first company was doing that. We did that for a while. We had some really cool products come out. We worked with director sets, Mecanio for the rest of the world, and we helped them build their first Wi-Fi connected robot. Sold 100,000 of units on Amazon. That was great. Ended up like dying though, so that was a bit sad. But
It's too early for
but
hard up for
yeah,
hardware startups. Yeah. It's like
it
tough
was
to
hard to
scale.
scale. So
Yeah.
like you find people who are ready to buy, but like there's like no, there were not enough of those guys for sure. And at the end, yeah, the products were expensive because the technology was really new and not mature, and like not everybody's ready to pay 300 euros at like 20 from 25 years ago euros. That's a lot of
Yeah.
euros.
As a early adopter geeks.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then you run out of those
yeah. So
quickly.
that
Yeah.
failed.
Wow. Hey, so before instead of going into those failures, how about just some lessons learned along the way? Like what would you like to have told your younger self who probably wouldn't have listened anyway, or what kind of lessons do you have, kind of writ large, like entrepreneurship in general, but also maybe kind of like some on chain lesson or two that you've learned specifically?
Oh, that's a tough one because the reality is that you have to go through the lessons to learn them. Just like you have to learn, you have to lose those coins to understand that to not keep your coins in a centralized exchange. Because you know about it and then you lose
Yeah.
them. And the fact that you know about it doesn't make it better. But like once you lose them, I guarantee you that you keep your coins in your pocket. So that's a lesson for the for the crypto guy. Keep your coins in your pocket.
But I do think, learning, learning from, your mistakes is a great way to learn, but learning from other people's mistakes is actually even better way to learn as long as you can do it. I think it is
I
possible.
agree.
I think it is possible to go, okay, you know what? There be dragons. Don't do that. Like oftentimes some of your mistakes are like, I couldn't even, repeat that mistake. It's not actually, testable in the lab. That was just a specific scenario. But I'm sure there are a few
Yeah. So typically, one of the lessons
other things you would
one of the
want.
things I would tell my younger self is like find an industry you like and stick to it. Because like for a couple of times, like I spent time first like like connected devices, then mobile apps, then cloud storage. So I did a lot of really cool stuff. But the reality is that like a lot of what I'm doing today relies on the fact that in the late 2000, like 2000, I was working on a VR headset product. Uh, just maybe a year before Chris started the Kickstarter campaign. And that got me to connect with a lot of the big names of today's world, building game engines and folks that are billionaires today. Like, like you need to think about compounding. Even if you're an entrepreneur, and you basically compounding your network and your connections. And if you switch too much between one
Yes.
or the other,
Yeah.
like from one idea to another, it's important to kind of stick with an industry,
You lose
build
it.
that
Yeah.
network, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day if your product is. It's better if it's a success. Like, you should not avoid to fail. Failing all the time, it doesn't help. Like, it's not good for the morale. You should get a few wins and you should be persistent. But really, what's important is to build, to take those opportunities to also build a network, build relationships, and build them up. And so I think it took me too long
Indeed.
to understand really that it's important to stick into an industry, and or at least into a sector, and build those connection, because that's what gets you to accelerate and go faster later.
Great advice. Excellent. Yeah. And I think, it's a vocation, entrepreneurship. Like, you're supposed to fail. Like, the most likely outcome is failure. It's just the way it is. That's just statistically true. But if you stick with it, then over time, you give yourself a better chance of succeeding. And, one of the best ways to do it is to be able to ask for help, like you said. So when
Yeah.
you're asking for help in, you know, Ubisoft or this, agency, like those kind of relationships, because then you're like, oh, I know her. I met him 20 years ago, and then you have this, uh, history with them, and then you can start to build this trust and then get that help and then really have a huge lever.
That's right. And it's really, like, again, back to my earlier point, it's about like sharing learnings. Everybody wants to learn new stuff. Like, even if you failing is a learning. At Azarus, we failed a couple of games that we tried around 2019, 2020. Game design was just too complicated, and we learned things about how viewers react on stream, what works, what doesn't. Failure not only is part of the process, but it's super valuable. It's probably more valuable than successes, if you ask me. You learn more through that.
Yeah,
Because, like,
indeed.
what was really interesting with us at Azarus is that we got an overnight success first time, and then we had to go through a bunch of failures to understand why was it a success to begin with.
Yes.
Like, what made
It's
it so good, and what we thought made it good was not actually it. Like, there's a bunch of things that we did not understand, and
yes.
that we did not realize, that we just nailed it by, like, that was kind of like a little bit lucky, and then we broke those things because we changed them, and we did not realize how much they mattered actually.
Mm. But I think you're right. You learn a lot from your failures, but oftentimes people don't deconstruct their successes well enough. Like, well, yep, it worked. I'm a genius, or that was great. Let's keep doing more of that. But more of what?
Yeah.
Like, what? It's so multivariate. Like, what was it exactly that got you there? And oftentimes it's not what your original thesis was. And yeah, it's really important to look at that. I
Yeah.
love it. Thank you.
Like, for instance, like on one of our game, we try to create like a meta game. Like, basically, you look at casual games, you usually have the core game loop, very simple clicker mechanism, and then you add some leveling up, some like meta story that gets you like a longer term. Basically, you have the short core game loop, and then you have longer cycles that build up on top, that create like
Bigger arc. Yeah.
further objective, mid-term objective, long-term objective that just build up on top of another. Newsflash will not work on stream. 2 minutes attention span
Oh,
max. Got to keep it short and
interesting.
simple.
Yeah. Just one core loop, and that's it. In and out.
Yes, yes, exactly. But, like, so seems obvious now, but like, we built it and we tried it, and we're like looking at the engagement numbers, like, wow, this is terrible. What the heck? And then like talking to users, we understand what's going on. And most hardcore users, when you put them on the stream, behave differently. It's really like, so basically it's really about shaping your mental model, and you maybe it's not it's like, and you have to run through the tests and the failures. They really help a lot shaping that model, because then they really question yourself to the bones. It's too easy to be just super happy that something works and like not ask yourself any question. But when you have to something that fails, you're like, what did I get wrong? And you really have to get to the bottom of it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Love it. Excellent. I could talk to you for another hour, my friend. Thank you for giving the time. Uh, Alex from Azarus, you're awesome. I really look forward to watching future growth of your platform, and all the best, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Rich. Much appreciated.
This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice. Any opinions provided in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers only.